The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime, the polished brass panels reflecting the dim golden light of the penthouse hallway. Adrian Steele stepped out, the solace of his Italian leather shoes making almost no sound against the plush carpet. His navy suit jacket hung loosely over one shoulder, the top two buttons of his shirt undone, revealing just enough to hint at the expensive dinner and decadent company he had just left behind. A trace of perfume, sweet, exotic, intoxicating still, lingered on him, clinging to the fibers of his shirt like an invisible stain. The air inside the penthouse was different tonight. It wasn't the usual stillness of a quiet home. It was heavier, thicker, as though the walls themselves were holding their breath. The city skyline stretched endlessly beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows, a scatter of glittering lights that looked almost unreal, like diamonds tossed across black velvet. But despite the wealth and beauty around him, Adrian felt something was wrong. He wasn't expecting anyone, not at this hour. He had timed his return with precision, knowing his wife would likely already be in bed. It was easier that way, fewer questions, fewer explanations, fewer moments where he had to look her in the eyes and pretend. The truth wasn't bleeding through the cracks in their marriage. Then he saw her. Elena stood in the center of the living room, framed beneath the chandelier that spilled warm amber light across the polished marble floor. She wasn't in her robe or nightgown. Instead, she wore a deep emerald silk dress that draped effortlessly over her figure, the fabric shimmering like ripples on a still pond. One hand rested gently on the curve of her pregnant belly, a small but undeniable swell that carried their child. Her other hand hung loosely by her side, but the stillness of her body made her seem like a statue, calm, beautiful, and impossibly unyielding. On the marble coffee table sat a single manila envelope. Its edges were sharp, its placement deliberate, as if it had been set there with the precision of a final move in a game Adrian didn't know he was losing. He froze, his easy stride faltering. She didn't smile. She didn't greet him the way she once did, rushing forward with a kiss or a warm word. Her eyes, dark and steady, were fixed on him. They were unreadable, and yet he could feel the weight in them. It wasn't anger, not the kind that burned bright and then fizzled out. It was something quieter, colder, and infinitely more dangerous. Long night? She asked, her voice soft, almost too soft. Adrian forced a half smile, moving toward the bar with an air of casual detachment, as though the tension in the room was nothing more than a trick of the lighting. "The business meeting ran late," he said, reaching for a crystal decanter of scotch. The sound of the amber liquid pouring into his glass was too loud in the silence. Like a whisper in a cathedral. Her gaze didn't waver. "Was it business?" she said, her tone steady. "Or pleasure?" He didn't answer right away. He took a slow sip, letting the burn of the liquor fill the silence instead. He had faced hostile boardrooms, ruthless competitors, and high-stakes negotiations that could destroy fortunes overnight, but none of it had ever felt like this, like standing in a room where every truth he'd hidden was suddenly illuminated. The perfume from earlier clung to him still. He wondered if she could smell it. He wondered if she had been standing there long enough to notice the faint lipstick smudge he'd missed on his collar. Outside, the city glittered without care, each tiny light a reminder of the empire he had built from the ground up. An empire that made him powerful, respected, feared. But as Elena stood there, framed by the light and shadows of their home, Adrian felt none of that power. She tilted her head slightly, her hand absently stroking the curve of her belly. The gesture should have been tender, loving, but here, now, it felt like a silent warning. "I waited up for you," she said finally, her voice almost lost in the expanse of the room. He set the glass down, his fingers lingering on its rim. He opened his mouth to respond, but something in her eyes told him this wasn't a night for quick explanations or charming diversions. This was a night where something irreversible was already in motion. The manila envelope on the table seemed to grow heavier in his vision, its presence undeniable. Adrian didn't know what was inside, not exactly, but a part of him, the part that had been pushing away guilt for months already, feared the answer, and for the first time in years, the billionaire who could buy anything, control anyone, and bend outcomes to his will felt a flicker of something he didn't like to admit he knew, fear. I can keep the rising tension and climactic resolution in the same expanded, cinematic style so the full story feels like a gripping, emotionally charged short film that way. The whole narrative flows like a script that could be voiced over for YouTube. Do you want me to expand the next section in the same way? Adrian didn't move toward the envelope right away. It sat there between them like a third presence in the room, silent but pulsing with meaning. He could feel his pulse in his throat, the kind of steady thud that made it hard to swallow. Elena hadn't taken her eyes off him, and in that unwavering gaze, he realized she wasn't just looking at him, she was reading him. Weighing every breath, every flicker of his expression, he stepped closer, slowly, the way you approach a sleeping animal you're not sure is tame. His shoes clicked softly against the marble, each step sounding sharper than it should. He stopped halfway, not because the distance was too far, but because something in her stillness told him he wasn't ready for what came next. You've been busy, she said, her voice like the surface of still water, smooth, reflective. But impossible to tell how deep it ran. Adrian's jaw tightened. He told himself to keep his voice level, to stay in control. You know how it is. Deals don't close themselves. Her hand, still resting on her belly, moved in a slow circle. Deals, she repeated, but the word was stripped of any business-like tone. In her mouth it became a test one. He already suspected he'd failed. The room felt smaller. The walls, the glass windows, the towering city skyline, all of it seemed to press inward, as if the air itself wanted to witness what was about to happen. Somewhere far below, a siren wailed, fading into the distance. The sound made the silence between them even more oppressive. Adrian glanced at the envelope again. The faintest corner of a photograph peeked out from the edge where the flap wasn't fully sealed. It wasn't enough to see clearly, but it was enough to make his chest tighten. Elena stepped forward, not much, just enough to shorten the space between them. Do you remember the first time we met? She asked suddenly. The question caught him off guard. Of course I do. Her lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. You said you'd never lie to me? You looked me in the eye and promised that. Adrian's instinct was to respond quickly, to deny whatever accusation was forming, but something about her calmness stopped him. This wasn't a storm of shouted words. This was the kind of confrontation that burned slowly, eating away at the ground under your feet until you realized you had nowhere left to stand. You know, she continued, I used to believe you could control everything, that you could bend the world to your will. But I've learned something about control. Adrian, it's an illusion. All it takes is one truth, one moment to unravel everything you've built. The weight of her words landed in his gut. She wasn't bluffing. She wasn't guessing. She knew. He wanted to turn, to pour himself another drink, to buy a few seconds of distance, but he didn't move. Her eyes held him there, like a pin through the chest of a butterfly. Open it, she said quietly, nodding toward the envelope. For a moment he considered refusing. He thought about telling her that whatever was in there didn't matter, that they could talk about it in the morning, that nothing could be more important than the child she carried. But he knew those were just defenses, paper-thin and destined to tear. He reached for the envelope. His fingers brushed the cool surface of the table before closing around the thick paper. Even without opening it, he could feel its weight, not physical, but the weight of consequence. As he pulled the flap open, the faint scent of perfume hit him again, but this time it wasn't the perfume from earlier. It was hers, Elena's, the scent that had once been home. The contrast made his chest ache in a way he hadn't expected. Inside were photographs. Crisp, glossy, undeniable. He flipped through them slowly, each one another step deeper into the trap he had set for himself. There he was, smiling, relaxed, his hand resting on the waist of a woman who wasn't his wife. Another shot of them at a restaurant, leaning close, eyes locked in a way that left no room for innocent explanations. Then a third photo taken from a distance, but intimate enough to confirm everything. The air felt heavier with each image. He didn't need to look up to know Elena was watching him, studying every micro-expression. When the last photo slipped from his fingers onto the table, he finally met her gaze. Her eyes weren't glassy with tears. They were steady, sharp, unblinking. She had already cried, he realized. That part was over. Now, she was here for something else, something final. Do you have anything to say? She asked. He opened his mouth, but the words didn't come. He wanted to tell her it was a mistake, that it didn't mean anything, that he was under pressure, lonely, drunk, any number of excuses that could fill the air. But standing there, looking at her, he knew that none of those explanations would erase what was in those photos. Her breathing was slow, measured. She wasn't breaking apart. She was holding herself together with a strength he had underestimated. You built an empire, she said after a long pause. You know how to protect assets, how to eliminate threats, how to win at any cost. But you forgot the one thing you should have protected more than anything else? She placed her hand more firmly on her stomach. Us. The silence after her words was colder than anything he had felt in years. It wrapped around him, suffocating, leaving no room to maneuver. He took a step toward her, but she didn't move. If anything, she seemed to draw herself taller, stronger. Elena. His voice was low, almost a whisper, as if speaking too. Loudly might shatter whatever fragile bridge still existed between them. Her gaze didn't soften. Don't, she said simply. The siren outside was long gone now, replaced by the hum of the city. The sound was distant, indifferent, a reminder that the world beyond these walls would keep moving no matter what happened in this room. Adrian realized in that moment that this wasn't just about betrayal, it was about power. And for the first time in his life, he wasn't the one holding it, if you want. I can now carry this exact emotional pacing straight into the climactic resolution, making it just as cinematic and loaded with tension so the whole arc feels like a single unfolding scene. Would you like me to? The front door closed with a dull thud, sealing him inside the cavernous mansion that, despite its chandeliers and marble floors, felt unnervingly cold. Nathan adjusted his cufflinks, still reeking faintly of expensive perfume, the remnants of a night spent in indulgence and betrayal. He had rehearsed an easy smile in the elevator, expecting his wife to be upstairs, unaware, but as he stepped into the living room, he froze. There she was, Clara, poised on the leather sofa, her belly rounded with the life they had created, her eyes steady as steel. In her hands, not the baby clothes he imagined, but a manila envelope. Divorce papers. For a moment, the air left the room, the silence so heavy it seemed to bend the light. He tried to speak, to reach for her hand, to mask his guilt behind charm. But she didn't flinch. Her voice was calm, frighteningly so, as she slid the documents across the coffee table toward him. Sign them. The weight of the moment pressed down, not just from the humiliation of being caught, but from the unshakable realization that she had known all along. Every late-night meeting, he claimed, every evasive glance, she had stored them like ammunition. And now she was firing her final shot, not with shouting or tears, but with precision. He stammered something about mistakes, about how it wasn't what it looked like, but the words hung limp in the air. Her silence was louder than his defense. Then, as if to strip him bare entirely, she revealed a small stack of photographs him and his mistress at the hotel, undeniable in their intimacy. He felt his throat tighten. There was no room left for lies. When he reached for her, a desperate act to reclaim the control he had so carelessly surrendered, she stepped back. Her eyes, once soft with devotion, now burned with a resolve he had never seen. You don't own me anymore, Nathan, she said, her voice steady, unshaken. You don't get to decide the story. She turned and walked toward the door. Her every step an unspoken declaration that she was not the broken one in this tale. He was. His chest ached, not just with the loss of her, but with the cold understanding that she was walking away stronger, freer, untethered from the man who had underestimated her. Hours later, he sat in the same spot, the divorce papers still on the table, untouched. The echo of her words replayed in his mind, drowning out every self-serving excuse. The empire he thought he ruled suddenly seemed hollow. Wealth couldn't buy her back. Power couldn't rewrite what she had done here, turning his betrayal into her liberation. He imagined her now, perhaps meeting with the lawyers, perhaps already planning her new chapter. One where she stood not as a shadow beside him, but as the author of her own story. And for the first time in years, Nathan felt something foreign: fear. Not of losing his reputation, but of knowing he had built his kingdom on sand, and she had just walked away with the foundation by the time the sun dipped below the horizon. The mansion was steeped in a deeper silence. He finally picked up the pen. The scratch of ink on paper felt like the closing of a book he had thought would never end. But as he signed his name, he knew she had already written the ending long before he walked through that door. Do you want me to also expand the hook and setup and rising tension for this same story in the same depth and tone so it flows as a complete three-part narrative?